For money, single mom bathes paraplegic millionaire. You won't believe what happens next. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson, but Ava Parker barely noticed. She sat at her modest kitchen table, a sea of bills spread before her like an insurmountable wave. The weight of her reality pressed heavily on her chest. She had been unemployed for 3 weeks. 3 long weeks since the hospital she'd worked at for nearly a decade let her go in the wake of budget cuts. As a single mother to an 8-year-old boy, every day without a paycheck felt like a step closer to the edge. "Mom, can we have mac and cheese tonight?" William's small voice broke through her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his mop of curly brown hair wild and untamed, his hopeful smile a balm to her frazzled nerves. "Sure, sweetheart," Ava replied, forcing a smile. She rose and opened the cupboard, mentally calculating how long the food she had would last. As she prepared dinner, her phone buzzed on the counter. Ava hesitated for a moment before picking it up, her stomach twisting. She had applied for every job she could find, hospitals, clinics, even grocery stores, but every callback seemed to lead to another rejection. This one, however, came from an unknown number. "This is Ava Parker," she answered, keeping her tone professional. "Ava, this is Elaine from the Care Companion Agency. We reviewed your application, and we have a position we think you'd be perfect for. It's a private care position for a client in Eastwood. Would you be available for an interview?" Ava's fingers tightened around the phone. Private care. That wasn't where she'd imagined her career going, but it was work, and she was running out of options. "Yes, I'm available," she said, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. "Great," Elaine replied, sounding relieved. "This is a live-in position caring for Ryan Brighton. He's a high-profile client, so professionalism is a must. The job includes housing and meals, along with a generous salary. Can you come to the Brighton estate tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Ava paused, glancing at William, who was now engrossed in a drawing at the table. A live-in position. It meant uprooting him, moving into a stranger's home. But the alternative, continuing down this financial freefall, was unthinkable. "I'll be there," she said firmly. The following morning, Ava drove through the winding streets of Eastwood, where the modest homes of her neighborhood gave way to sprawling estates with manicured lawns. The Brighton mansion came into view, an imposing structure of grey stone surrounded by towering trees and a wrought-iron gate. It was beautiful but intimidating, the kind of place that felt more like a fortress than a home. She parked her car and smoothed her blazer before walking up to the gate, where a security camera swiveled toward her. A voice crackled through the intercom. "State your name and business." "Ava Parker, I'm here for the interview." The gate creaked open, and Ava stepped through, her heels clicking against the stone path. The front door was opened by a housekeeper, who introduced herself as Maria, and led Ava into a sitting room with high ceilings and a fireplace that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything about the place screamed wealth and detachment. She didn't wait long before Elaine appeared, a brisk woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a clipboard. "Thank you for coming, Ava," she said. "Before we proceed, I need to warn you. Mr. Brighton can be difficult." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Difficult how?" Elaine hesitated. "He's been through a lot. The accident was devastating, and he's not the most pleasant person to be around. But he needs someone who won't back down, someone who can handle his moods." Ava squared her shoulders. "I can handle it." Elaine studied her for a moment before nodding. "Let's meet him." Ryan Brighton was in his study, seated in a motorized wheelchair by a massive oak desk. The man before her didn't match the image Ava had conjured in her mind. He was younger than she expected, perhaps mid-30s, with dark hair that fell messily over his forehead and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. But there was an air of bitterness about him, a tension in the set of his jaw and the hard line of his mouth. "You're the new caretaker?" he asked, his voice edged with sarcasm. "I'm here to interview for the position," Ava replied, keeping her tone neutral. Ryan smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Let me save you the trouble. I don't need a babysitter." Ava didn't flinch. "Good, because I'm not a babysitter. I'm a professional caregiver with over 10 years of experience." His eyes narrowed as if trying to decide whether her confidence was genuine or an act. After a long pause, he turned to Elaine. "She'll do." Ava blinked. "That's it. No questions, no discussion." Ryan's gaze shifted back to her, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than disdain. "I don't need questions to know whether someone can handle this job. You'll either quit or stick around. Time will tell which one it is." It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but Ava nodded. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow," Ryan said curtly, turning his attention back to the papers on his desk. As Ava walked back to her car, a mixture of relief and apprehension swirled in her chest. She'd gotten the job, but stepping into Ryan Brighton's world felt like walking into a storm. Still, she reminded herself of the one reason she couldn't back down: William. For him, she would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The gates closed behind her as she drove away, the Brighton mansion shrinking in her rearview mirror. But something told her it wouldn't feel small for long. The next morning, Ava packed their modest belongings into the trunk of her car, while William buzzed around her with uncontainable excitement. "Do you think the new house will have a pool? Or maybe a trampoline?" he asked, his bright eyes practically glowing. Ava ruffled his hair with a small laugh, masking her own unease. "I don't know, kiddo. Let's get there and find out." The drive to the Brighton mansion felt different this time. As they passed the towering gates and pulled into the long driveway, William's awe was palpable. "Mom, this place is huge!" he exclaimed, pressing his face to the window. "Stay close to me, okay?" Ava instructed as they stepped out of the car. She smoothed her blouse and took a deep breath. This wasn't just a job, it was a leap into the unknown. Maria greeted them at the door and guided them through the grand hallways. She seemed to soften slightly when she spotted William, offering him a warm smile. "I'll show you to your quarters," Maria said to Ava, leading them up a spiral staircase to a cozy wing of the mansion. The apartment-like space had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchenette, and a view of the sprawling gardens. As Ava unpacked, William darted around, exploring every nook and cranny. "Mom, look, my room has a TV," he shouted, his voice echoing. "That's great, Will," Ava said with a smile, though her mind was already on the hours ahead. She would meet Ryan again in less than an hour to begin her duties. Ava hoped the morning's enthusiasm would help balance the challenges she was sure to face. Ryan was waiting in the sitting room when Ava arrived. He glanced up from his book as she entered, his expression as impassive as the day before. "You're late," he said flatly. Ava checked her watch. "I'm 5 minutes early." Ryan's lips twitched, as if suppressing a smile, but his tone remained sharp. "Let's set some ground rules. First, I don't need pity. Second, don't try to change me. You're here to do a job, nothing more, nothing less." Ava met his gaze evenly. "I don't do pity, and I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to help with what you need, that's it." Ryan leaned back in his chair, scrutinizing her. "We'll see how long that lasts." Their first day was a delicate dance. Ava learned the intricacies of Ryan's routines, his physical therapy sessions, his medication schedule, and his preferences for everything from meals to the arrangement of books on his desk. Ryan, true to Elaine's warning, was demanding and curt, testing Ava's patience at every turn. "You don't have to hover," Ryan snapped as Ava adjusted the pillow behind his back. "I'm not hovering, I'm doing my job," she replied, her tone calm but firm. He muttered something under his breath, but Ava didn't bite. Instead, she focused on staying professional, determined not to let his attitude rattle her. Meanwhile, William was adapting to the mansion with surprising ease. By afternoon, he had discovered the sprawling garden, where he encountered an older groundskeeper named Frank. The two quickly struck up a friendship, with Frank sharing stories about the estate and its history. When William asked about Ryan, Frank hesitated. "Mr. Brighton's been through a lot, lad. Don't take it personally if he seems grumpy. Deep down, he's a good man." William nodded, filing the information away. His natural curiosity and friendliness made him a bright spot in the otherwise somber mansion. That evening, as Ava settled William into bed, she noticed the spark in his eyes had dimmed slightly. "How are you feeling about all this, buddy?" she asked, sitting beside him. It's different, he admitted, his voice small. But I think it'll be okay. The garden is cool and Frank is nice. I think Mr. Ryan is sad, though. Ava's heart clenched at her son's simple observation. Maybe he is, she said softly. But we can be kind to him, right? William nodded, his smile returning. Yeah, maybe he needs a friend. Ava kissed his forehead and tucked him in. As she turned out the light, she couldn't help but wonder if her son's insight might be the key to unlocking Ryan's guarded heart. Later, as Ava reviewed the events of the day in the quiet of her room, she realized how much this job would challenge her, not just professionally but emotionally. Ryan's walls were high, but Ava was determined to meet him with patience and perseverance. After all, she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for William, for a chance at stability, and for the hope that this strange new life might become something better than she'd imagined. The morning sunlight filtered through the high windows of the Brighton mansion as Ava moved through her routine. Ryan's biting sarcasm was in full force as usual, but she met it with unwavering professionalism, refusing to let his sharp words deter her. Still, each interaction felt like navigating a minefield, and she couldn't shake the sense that he was testing her limits. Meanwhile, William's natural curiosity had turned the estate into a vast playground. While Ava worked, he spent his time exploring under the watchful eye of Frank, the groundskeeper. The garden quickly became William's favorite place, a lush expanse of vibrant flowers, towering hedges, and winding stone paths. It was in this space, surrounded by life, that the first seeds of change began to sprout. That afternoon, Ava found herself in the kitchen preparing Ryan's lunch. Maria, the housekeeper, entered with an approving nod. "You're holding up better than most," Maria said, her voice tinged with admiration. "Is he always this intense?" Ava asked, careful not to let frustration seep into her tone. Maria chuckled. "Ryan? Oh, yes. But he wasn't always like this. Before the accident, he was charming, full of life. Losing everything, his mobility, his fiancée, it hardened him. He pushes people away because he's afraid they'll leave anyway." The words stayed with Ava as she carried Ryan's lunch to his study. She hesitated at the door, then knocked lightly before entering. Ryan looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. "Lunch," she announced, setting the tray down. "I can see that," he replied, his voice dry. Ava bit back a retort and turned to leave, but Ryan's voice stopped her. "What's your son doing?" "Exploring the garden," Ava replied. "Why?" Ryan hesitated, as if debating whether to speak further. "That garden was my mother's pride and joy. She designed it herself. I haven't been out there in years." Ava looked at him carefully. Beneath his clipped tone, there was a trace of something softer, nostalgia, perhaps. But before she could respond, he dismissed her with a wave, retreating back into his work. Later that day, Ava found William in the garden, sitting cross-legged near a small fountain with Frank by his side. The two were deep in conversation, and Ava felt a pang of gratitude for the older man's kindness. "What are you two up to?" Ava asked, crouching beside them. "Frank says this garden is magical," William said, his voice filled with wonder. "He says it can make people happy." Frank laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Well, I may have exaggerated a bit, but your son's not far off. This place has a way of bringing people together." Ava smiled, but her thoughts drifted back to Ryan. If only he could see what she was seeing, the joy and life that still thrived in his world. That evening, as Ava helped Ryan with his physical therapy, the tension between them began to ease, if only slightly. Ryan still barked orders, but Ava noticed his barbs weren't as sharp, his glares less piercing. As she massaged his shoulders, he let out a resigned sigh. "You're persistent," he muttered. "It's part of the job," Ava replied, keeping her tone light. "Most people quit within a week," he said, glancing at her. "Why haven't you?" Ava paused, meeting his gaze. "Because I'm not most people." Something flickered in Ryan's eyes. Surprise, maybe even respect, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He didn't respond, but the silence that followed felt less heavy than before. The next morning, William approached Ryan in the library, clutching a soccer ball he'd found in the shed. Ava, who had just entered with a stack of laundry, froze in the doorway, her heart in her throat. "Mr. Ryan, do you like soccer?" William asked, his voice cheerful and unguarded. Ryan looked up, clearly taken aback by the boy's boldness. "I used to," he said after a moment. "Why?" "Frank said there's an old field behind the garden. Can we check it out? Maybe you can teach me some tricks." Ryan stared at William, his expression unreadable. Ava expected him to refuse, to snap at the boy for interrupting his solitude, but instead, Ryan's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "Maybe someday," he said, his tone softer than Ava had ever heard. That evening, Ava found herself reflecting on the day's events. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope, a possibility that Ryan wasn't as unreachable as he seemed. And as she tucked William into bed, his excited chatter about Ryan and the garden filling the room, Ava realized that her son's boundless optimism might be the very thing to crack the walls around Ryan's heart. In the quiet of her own room, Ava stared out the window at the moonlit garden below. There was a long road ahead, but she was beginning to believe that change, real, meaningful change, was possible. For Ryan, for herself, and most importantly, for William. The Brighton mansion felt unusually alive in the days that followed. William's presence, with his boundless curiosity and knack for finding joy in the smallest things, seemed to breathe life into its quiet halls. Even Ryan, for all his guardedness, seemed unable to fully resist the boy's charm. But the walls Ryan had built around himself were still formidable, and Ava knew better than to expect an overnight transformation. Her focus remained on her work, managing Ryan's physical therapy, ensuring his routines were followed, and balancing her responsibilities with William's needs. Still, she couldn't ignore the subtle shifts that were beginning to occur. It was during one of Ryan's physical therapy sessions that the cracks in his armor began to show. Ava guided him through a series of stretches, her hands steady and firm as she worked the tension from his muscles. Ryan winced, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I hate this," he muttered, his voice low but sharp. "I hate needing help for everything." Ava paused, meeting his gaze. "I know it's hard," she said gently, "but you're doing better than you think. You've made progress." Ryan scoffed, his expression darkening. "Progress? Look at me. This isn't progress. This is surviving." Ava hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes surviving is enough," she said softly. "Until it isn't. Then you fight for more." Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening. For a moment, Ava thought she'd overstepped, but then he spoke, his voice quieter now. "I used to fight for more. Before the accident, I had plans, goals. None of that matters anymore." "It can matter again," Ava said, her tone firm but kind. "You just have to decide it's worth fighting for." Ryan didn't respond, but Ava caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Pain, yes, but also a sliver of curiosity, as if he were entertaining the possibility of her words. Later that day, Ava found William in the garden, bouncing his soccer ball against a low stone wall. He turned to her with a grin. "Mum, Frank said there's a pond with ducks on the other side of the field. Can we go see it?" Ava smiled, ruffling his hair. "Maybe tomorrow. Right now I need to check on Mr. Ryan." William's face lit up. "Can I come? I'll be quiet, I promise." Ava hesitated. William had a way of softening Ryan's sharp edges, but she wasn't sure if today was the right time. Still, she nodded. "All right, but just for a little while." When they entered Ryan's study, William hesitated in the doorway, clutching his soccer ball like a shield. Ryan glanced up from his laptop, his expression shifting from annoyance to mild curiosity. "What's this?" Ryan asked, gesturing toward the boy. "I brought my ball," William said shyly. "Frank said you like soccer. Do you think you could show me some moves?" Ryan's eyes flicked to the ball, then to Ava, who shrugged lightly. "He's been dying to ask you," she said with a small smile. For a moment, Ryan said nothing. Then, to Ava's surprise, he leaned forward, his expression softening ever so slightly. "All right, kid," he said. "Come here." William's face lit up as he approached, and Ryan took the ball, spinning it expertly in his hands. "You see this?" he said, demonstrating a simple trick. It's all about control. Keep your focus and the ball will do what you want." William watched, enraptured, and when Ryan handed the ball back, he eagerly tried to mimic the move. It wasn't perfect, but Ryan's low chuckle suggested he wasn't entirely unimpressed. That night, as Ava settled William into bed, he couldn't stop talking about Ryan. "He's really good at soccer, Mom." And he wasn't grumpy at all. Ava smiled, smoothing the blanket over him. "I'm glad you two had fun," she said. "But remember, Mr. Ryan's been through a lot. He's still figuring things out." William nodded solemnly. "I know. I think he's lonely." Ava's heart tightened at her son's words. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I think you're helping him, just by being you." William grinned and snuggled into his pillow, his eyes already drooping. Ava kissed his forehead, her thoughts lingering on Ryan as she left the room. In her own room, Ava sat by the window, gazing out at the moonlit garden. Ryan's vulnerability during therapy, his willingness to engage with William, it was more than she'd expected. The man beneath the bitterness and anger was starting to emerge, and Ava couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. But change, she knew, was never easy. Ryan's pain ran deep, and Ava had no illusions about the road ahead. Still, she resolved to keep pushing forward. For Ryan, for William, and for the fragile possibility that this place, this job, could become something more than she'd ever imagined. The Brighton mansion sat under a slate-grey sky as an impending storm rolled in, casting shadows over the garden. Ava spent the morning navigating her routine, but the tense air seemed to mirror the mood inside. Ryan had been unusually quiet during breakfast, his sharp wit dulled by an unspoken heaviness. Even William, usually a whirlwind of energy, sensed the shift. As the storm began to gather strength that afternoon, Ava was mid-session with Ryan, guiding him through his physical therapy. His mood had been sour all day, and now, as thunder rumbled in the distance, his irritation reached a boiling point. "Enough," he snapped, pulling away from her hands. "What's the point of this? I'm not getting better. I'm just existing." Ava straightened, keeping her tone calm. "You're stronger than you were a month ago, Ryan. Progress isn't always obvious, but it's there." Ryan wheeled himself toward the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "You don't understand," he said bitterly. "You can't possibly understand." Ava hesitated, debating whether to push back. Finally, she said, "You're right. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, but I know what it's like to fight for something that feels impossible." Ryan turned to her, his expression a mix of anger and something deeper, pain. "What do you know about impossible?" "Try being a single mother," Ava said evenly. "Try raising a child on your own, losing your job, and wondering how you're going to keep a roof over his head. We all have battles, Ryan. Yours might be different, but it doesn't mean they don't matter." For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall. Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't need a lecture," he muttered. "And I'm not giving you one," Ava replied, her voice softer now. "But you're not alone in this, not if you don't want to be." Ryan didn't respond, and Ava let the silence linger, giving him space to process her words. The storm intensified as evening fell, the wind howling through the trees and rain lashing against the windows. Ava prepared dinner in the kitchen, her thoughts still on Ryan. She glanced at the clock and realized she hadn't seen William in hours. Her pulse quickened as she called out to him, her voice echoing through the empty halls. Maria appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed. "I saw him heading toward the garden earlier. He had his soccer ball with him." Ava's heart sank. In this weather? Before Maria could respond, Ava grabbed her raincoat and dashed outside, the storm battering her as she searched the garden. Lightning illuminated the sprawling grounds, and Ava called out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "William!" Inside the mansion, Ryan sat in his study, the distant sound of Ava's shouts piercing his solitude. He frowned, wheeling himself to the window. The sight of her figure moving through the storm sent a jolt through him. Maria appeared in the doorway, looking worried. "She's looking for her son. He's out there somewhere." Ryan's chest tightened. Without a second thought, he grabbed his phone and called Frank, who was already on the estate. "Get out there and help her," Ryan barked. I want that kid found. Frank didn't hesitate, and moments later, Ryan found himself alone again, anxiety gnawing at him. His hands clenched the armrests of his wheelchair as he stared out at the storm, helplessness washing over him. Ava finally spotted William near the old soccer field, his small figure huddled under a tree. Relief flooded her as she ran to him, wrapping him in her arms. Mom, I'm sorry, William sobbed. I didn't mean to scare you. It's okay, sweetheart, Ava said, her voice trembling. Let's get you inside. As they made their way back, Frank appeared with an umbrella, guiding them toward the mansion. Ava was soaked to the bone, but the sight of the warm lights of the house brought a wave of gratitude. When they entered the mansion, Ryan was waiting in the foyer, his expression unreadable. Ava carried William upstairs to get him changed, but not before Ryan's voice stopped her. Is he all right? Ava turned, surprised by the concern in his tone. He's fine, just cold and scared. Ryan nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. Good. Later that night, Ava found herself back in Ryan's study. He gestured for her to sit, an unusual gesture of civility. I want to apologize, he said, his voice low, for earlier. I've been difficult. Ava smiled faintly. That's one way to put it. Ryan's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. You're stronger than most people I know, he admitted. I don't say that lightly. Thank you, Ava replied, her voice soft. And for what it's worth, you're stronger than you think. Ryan didn't respond, but the tension between them seemed to ease, replaced by something closer to understanding. That night, as Ava tucked William into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. Mr. Ryan cares about us, doesn't he? Ava smoothed his hair, her heart swelling. I think he does, she said softly, in his own way. And for the first time since coming to the Brighton mansion, Ava felt that they weren't just surviving. They were beginning to build something more, something worth fighting for. The calm after the storm brought an unusual sense of quiet to the Brighton mansion. Ryan had softened ever so slightly since the events of the tempestuous night. He spoke less sharply, and Ava even caught him glancing at William during meals with something resembling fondness. But the tentative progress was upended by the unexpected arrival of Ryan's younger sister, Olivia. Ava first heard about Olivia when Maria approached her early in the morning, wringing her hands nervously. Miss Olivia's coming to stay for a while, she said, her tone uneasy. Who's Olivia? Ava asked, pausing in her task of organizing Ryan's physical therapy equipment. His sister, Maria replied. And she's, well, let's just say she has her opinions about this house and the people in it. Ava raised an eyebrow. People like me, you mean? Maria hesitated before nodding. And your son. Just be careful. By mid-afternoon, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Olivia stepped out, her appearance as polished as the vehicle that brought her. Dressed in designer clothes and exuding an air of entitlement, she wasted no time making her presence known. Ava, I presume, she said, her tone icy as they were introduced in the foyer. Her gaze swept over Ava and lingered disapprovingly on William, who was peeking out from behind his mother. Yes, Ava replied, keeping her voice even. And this is my son, William. Olivia's smile didn't reach her eyes. I see. Ryan entered the room, wheeling himself forward with an air of irritation. Olivia, he said flatly, didn't realize you'd be gracing us with your presence so soon. I didn't realize I needed an invitation, Olivia shot back, her tone clipped. I'll only be here while I recover. Recover? Ryan's expression turned to one of mild surprise. I had a minor accident, Olivia explained, waving a manicured hand dismissively. The doctor said I should avoid unnecessary stress, so I thought staying here would be relaxing. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his frustration evident. The next few days were tense. Olivia had a knack for making herself the center of attention, and her veiled criticisms of Ava and William were impossible to ignore. I'm surprised Ryan agreed to have a child running around the house, she said one evening during dinner. It's hardly the environment for a lively presence. William frowned but said nothing, and Ava clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain calm. "William is well behaved," she said, "and he's been nothing but respectful." "Respectful?" Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps, but this house isn't a playground." Before Ava could respond, Ryan spoke up, his voice sharp. "Leave it, Olivia." Olivia blinked, taken aback by his tone. Ryan rarely intervened in her jabs, and his defense of Ava and William seemed to catch everyone off guard. Later that night, Ava found Ryan in his study, the glow of a desk lamp illuminating his face. She hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside. "Thank you," she said softly. Ryan looked up, his expression curious. "For what?" "For standing up for us at dinner. You didn't have to do that." Ryan shrugged, looking away. "Olivia can be difficult. She's always been like that." "Well, it meant a lot," Ava said. "To William and to me." Ryan glanced at her, his gaze lingering for a moment before he nodded. "You and your son are the only ones keeping this place from feeling like a mausoleum. I may not say it often, but I notice." Ava felt a warmth rise in her chest at his words. Before she could respond, Ryan turned his attention back to the papers on his desk, effectively ending the conversation. Despite the friction Olivia brought, her presence began to serve as a catalyst for change. Watching her brother interact with William, she started to notice the subtle but significant shifts in his demeanor. One afternoon, she found herself in the garden, observing as Ryan, Ava, and William worked together to clear debris from the old soccer field. "I never thought I'd see the day," Olivia murmured, almost to herself. "What's that?" Ava asked, glancing up from her work. "Ryan," Olivia said, her voice unusually soft. "He's different with you two." Ava smiled faintly. "He's still Ryan." "True," Olivia said with a small laugh, "but he's more human." As the days passed, Olivia began to soften as well. She joined William in the garden one morning, helping him pick flowers for a bouquet. Later, she sat with Ava over tea, the conversation surprisingly civil. "I underestimated you," Olivia admitted at one point. "Ryan's not easy, and neither is this house. But you've managed to bring something back to it." Ava nodded, her gaze steady. "Ryan's stronger than he gives himself credit for. He just needs someone to remind him of that." Olivia studied her for a moment before nodding. "Maybe you're right." That evening, Ryan joined Ava and William for dinner in the kitchen, a rare departure from his usual solitary meals. Olivia appeared in the doorway, watching them with an unreadable expression. "You're welcome to join us," Ryan said, his tone neutral but inviting. Olivia hesitated before stepping inside. "Don't mind if I do." As the four of them sat together, laughter and conversation filling the space, Ava couldn't help but feel that the Brighton mansion was starting to feel a little less cold, a little more like a home. And for the first time, Olivia seemed to feel it too. The Brighton mansion continued to shift under the weight of newfound warmth. Olivia's presence, while initially abrasive, had softened considerably as she integrated herself into the evolving dynamic. Ryan, once an island of bitterness, had grown closer not only to Ava, but also to William, whose infectious optimism seemed to crack even the toughest of walls. But as the days turned into weeks, the undercurrent of unspoken emotions between Ryan and Ava became harder to ignore. It was late one evening when Ava found herself in the kitchen, finishing the dishes after dinner. The house was quiet, William having gone to bed, and Olivia tucked away in her wing of the mansion. Ava was startled when Ryan wheeled into the room, his presence unexpected but oddly welcome. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, drying her hands on a towel. Ryan shook his head. "Not much of a sleeper these days." Ava gestured toward the kettle on the stove. "Tea?" Ryan hesitated before nodding. "Sure." She moved with practiced ease, preparing the tea and setting a cup before him at the table. Ryan studied her for a moment, his gaze unusually soft. "You've changed this place," he said finally. Ava looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "I don't know about that." "I do," Ryan said. "Before you and William came, this house felt dead. Now it feels alive." Ava smiled faintly. "That's William. He has a way of bringing life wherever he goes." Ryan shook his head. "It's not just him, it's you." The words hung in the air, and Ava felt her cheeks warm. She looked away, focusing on her tea. "I just did my job." Ryan's laugh was soft, almost self-deprecating. It's more than that. You've shown me things I didn't think I'd ever feel again. Hope, for one, a reason to care. Ava's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. When she met Ryan's gaze, she saw the raw vulnerability he rarely let show. "Ryan," she began, unsure of how to respond, but he shook his head, breaking the tension with a wry smile. "Ignore me. It's late, and I'm rambling." Ava wasn't convinced, but she let the moment pass, sensing that Ryan wasn't ready to say more. "Get some rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow's another day." The next morning, William was a bundle of energy as he dragged Ryan outside to the old soccer field. Over the past few weeks, they had worked together to clear it, reviving the space into something usable again. It had become a favorite spot for William, and to everyone's surprise, Ryan had taken to joining him, coaching from the sidelines and even attempting to kick the ball on occasion. Ava watched from the garden, a smile tugging at her lips as she saw William laughing, Ryan's gruff exterior giving way to something almost playful. Olivia appeared beside her, her arms crossed as she observed the scene. "You know," Olivia said, her voice thoughtful, "I haven't seen him like this since before the accident." Ava glanced at her. "Like what?" "Happy." The word hung in the air, and Ava felt a swell of emotion. She knew Olivia was right. Ryan was changing, and the man she was seeing now, open, kind, even joyful, was a far cry from the bitter recluse she'd met weeks ago. That evening, as the sun set over the estate, Ryan invited Ava and William to join him in the study. To Ava's surprise, he had something to share. "I've been thinking," Ryan began, his tone measured, "about this house, about what it's become since you've been here." Ava sat quietly, unsure of where he was going. "I want to make this place more than what it was," Ryan continued. "Not just for me, but for people like me, people who need help, who feel like they've lost everything." Ava's breath caught. "You're serious?" Ryan nodded. "Dead serious. I've already contacted some architects to discuss renovations. I want to turn this mansion into a space that's fully accessible, a place where people with disabilities can feel empowered. And I want your help." Ava stared at him, stunned. "Me? What can I do?" "You've already done more than you know," Ryan said. "But if you're willing, I'd like you to oversee some of the changes. You know what's needed better than anyone." Ava felt her chest tighten, a mix of pride and disbelief swelling within her. "I'd be honored," she said softly. "And William," Ryan added, turning to the boy, "how would you like to help me build a soccer field out there? A real one, with goals and everything?" William's face lit up. "Really? That would be amazing!" As the days turned into weeks, the mansion began to transform, not just physically, but emotionally. The renovations were in full swing, with Ryan leading the charge and Ava by his side. Olivia, to everyone's surprise, became an active supporter of the changes, using her social connections to help fundraise for the project. But the most profound transformation was the one taking place between Ryan and Ava. Their shared moments grew deeper, the unspoken bond between them becoming impossible to ignore. One evening, as they stood in the garden under the stars, Ryan finally let the words spill out. "I think I've been falling for you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava looked at him, her heart pounding. "Ryan, I know it's complicated," he said quickly, "but I had to tell you." Ava smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's not complicated at all," she said. "I feel the same way." And in that moment, under the starlit sky, the walls Ryan had built around his heart came crumbling down, replaced by something far stronger: love.